Where to begin with this one? 1972, I think. Honda Z50 that showed up as a pile of parts. Not even a box, just a pile. Came from a friend that wanted to restore it for her boyfriend as a birthday present and never wanted to turn down a project because there's absolutely nothing significant going on in the world right now. I said sure. So this took place over the course of 8 weeks. Fairly slowly. There wasn't a significant amount of work. Most of the time was waiting for parts and some light assembly here and there, but it did need a lot of work. It had a couple of issues, and what I'll do is just go through the photos here chronologically, and I'll talk about them as they come up. As with anything, starting with a power wash is always a big help, so that's what we did. Stripped this thing down basically to bare components, gave it a good power wash so it could come all the way apart. The engine itself, I have a habit of giving things a once over and looking at them anyway. I was going to do basic stuff, replace the points, replace the condenser, go through the carburetor. But when I got a little bit deeper into this thing, I saw it had a bit of an interesting history in the form of a welded-on kickstarter. So there you see it. That ended up being a full-blown involved repair. So cases have to be split, engine has to come apart. The whole thing is going down to bare components. A couple of pictures here of the head coming off. The cylinder itself actually looked fairly okay. It was in good shape. And as I got further into the engine there, things looked like they were not very used or abused too badly. Likely this thing just stopped working. When I got it, that kickstarter, even though it was welded on, was slipping again. So I grinded the weld off and was able to pop the kickstarter off, hoping that it was just the kickstarter splines that were messed up, but the shaft itself was messed up. So into the engine we go with the automatic clutch. We'll come back to that probably a couple of times, but the automatic clutch came out, first time ever dealing with it, and after 30-45 minutes, there's your engine, the whole entire thing. Eventually was able to get to the kickstarter gear, identified the shaft that I needed, and put that on order to replace. In the meantime, why not port the head? Because we're there and this thing needs all kinds of power. So went through with the Dremel tool, gave it a port and light polish job, went ahead and ground the valve seats, lapped them anyway, and as I waited for parts, I worked on other small bits. Moving on to the frame and the tires, the rear hub on this thing was totally shot, completely busted. Someone tried to stick about 5-inch long bolts through the whole thing to secure the sprocket to the hub, ended up blowing up the brakes and all kinds of stuff. It was pretty bad. So ordered a new hub and spent a lot of time cleaning up the frame, painting the frame, polishing and cleaning up old parts, and then clear coating those. And then it came time for these tires. All they needed was new tubes. Wheels were okay. The tires themselves were in okay shape, albeit old. And I think this is the only picture I have, but this is probably a day of time prying these rims apart, trying to save the tires so that I didn't have to buy new ones. And eventually, I did get them apart. I rust-proofed the inside of them, put in the new tubes that had 90-degree valve stems on them, and painted up the wheels, assembled them together, and then I was able to carry on to the engine. I think it's best blamed on OCD, but I feel like whenever you have an engine all the way apart, you just have to coat the cases either with powder coat, Cerakote, some kind of coating. You got to make them look pretty. So what you see there is the shell case before it was sandblasted. There'll be some more pictures here, and I ended up preparing this thing for Cerakote. Multi-step process, but I really like that coating. So you can see a picture here of getting everything washed up. A lot of sandblasting. A lot of, well, it's coal slag, but blasting everything with that, and it's a pain because it gets in all these tiny little holes. You have to wash these parts 3, 4, 5 times, really. But eventually, once they are all washed and clean, you can spray the Cerakote, let that air cure for 15 minutes, and then put them in the oven. I really love this stuff. One, because it's such a thin coating, I don't need to tape anything off. But two, it's ceramic based, it's so hard, super durable, and I think this finish matches most factory 70s Japanese motorcycles pretty closely. so it fits the bill just fine. After everything was baked and cooled off, it was time to reassemble. So you can see here a shot of some of the various parts. There's that kickstart shaft, old compared to the new. Here's a look at the timing chain tensioning mechanism behind the stator itself. Pretty easy to figure out. And putting the top end back together with the cylinder, the piston. Another shot of that stator. This is pre-points and condenser, I believe. And then we ran into this little problem. Not what I wanted to be doing at this point, but when I was putting the flywheel back on, I realized these threads pretty toast, and the only thing I can think to do is do a little bit of additive welding. So I've got the stubby TIG torch out. Gonna see if I can add a little bit of metal on there, and then I have a 10mm by 1mm pitch thread die, or 1.5. There you go. I got this guy. I'll try and tap it, see if we can get the flywheel to hold. It's not pretty, but that's a lot more threads than the ones that were on there a moment ago. So, gonna give it a shot with a new nut because I don't trust the old one that came off. And we'll do some Loctite and snug, but not too tight. I'll look up the torque spec and see how close I feel comfortable getting to that. Now, given my track record of welding, I think we can only describe that as a medium to major sized miracle, but it held just fine. The nut snugged down, the threads held perfectly okay, and a small crisis was averted. And so it was ready to assemble onto the other side of the engine with the clutch, the other miscellaneous shifting parts, and I'll show you a little time lapse or something here of that process. If I've learned nothing from splitting the cases on motorcycles, it is to always make sure it shifts before you seal it back up. So that's what I'm doing here, checking the shift mechanism, and yet still, after all that, I had shifting problems when I started it up, but those are easily solved. I actually don't know what the problem was, but I took it apart, looked at it, put it back together, and it worked just fine after that. So here's a quick before and after of the seat. Overall, the pan was in good condition, just needed a cover and a little bit of repair to the seat foam, but easily doable by someone as poorly skilled at upholstery as myself. And then went on to painting the paintable parts. Decided on a red color and ended up going with a candy version of that. So silver base coat and then about 7 or 8 coats of a candy red top coat. It ended up looking fantastic, I think. I really like it. It's not a color that came on this motorcycle, but customer request, and I think it ended up looking very nice. Now, a word on the gas tank. The original tank had character, but it also had holes. For every hole I tried to weld, 3 or 4 or 5 showed up, and I ended up chasing those, and I just couldn't save the tank. So I've got a new one on order, and it'll be here Monday. I have to repaint it, color match it, do all that, but I painted the original one for continuity's sake. It looks good with the tank on there, and that's what you see here. First start. Not bad. Needs more gas. Now you're probably thinking what I'm thinking. Man, that's real impressive for just eyeballing the timing and getting it started right up on the third kick. Amazing. But hey, sounds like it has a weird noise to it. Must just be the audio. Well, to the astute viewer, a little bit of foreshadowing. That noise was present, and it wasn't an exhaust leak, and it wasn't normal. Quick update on Honda Z50 clutches, because I got the bike all back together and decided to test fire it, and this ain't right. You can see a little bit of wear on those rivets and probably some other places. There was some marking in here, so going to investigate. Try it again. This might have been backwards, not 100% sure, but I'm gonna figure it out. Okay, apologies for the fan noise, but it's hot. Hopefully you can hear me. This much I know. You can't see it, but the rollers here are right. They gotta go there. This has to go here. Has to. Okay? The rest of it, gonna refigure out. Symptoms, no clutch at all. Felt like a manual transmission. You click it down into gear and there was no slipping, no anything, just 100% transmission action. So, not what you want out of an automatic. I don't know why someone didn't tell me that went that way. Sure seems a lot better. Okay, have a look. Before, this piece was face down in there, and you can see, possibly, slight marks on here, some slight marks on these rivets. It would appear to me that this bit drops down in there. These little notches hold on to the primary gear. So that's how that goes. And then this, with its recessed ramped notches, will ride on those little bits there. Man, guaranteed to work now. So before, with the configuration, the only way that I could get the nut back on, imagine the clutch pack is in there, was to put these down in there. And it felt wrong, and I didn't like it, and something in my heart told me that that can't be right, but it was the only way I could figure it out. Now, with the benefit of knowing something was wrong and having to take it all back apart, we've learned something today. So, don't listen to anything I said before. Start there. Man, that's nice. That is nice. And then resume your clutch discs. What are we going to do? Probably a friction, a steel plate somewhere. No, double friction. Come on now. Really hard to do with one hand. And I really should have turned the camera off by now, but here we are, Thursday night. Like that, like that, like that, except I'm going to put springs behind there. And then I've been told the clutch will turn one way and not the other way. But either way, don't care about that right now because the action is working. So more in a little bit. Okay. Less than 60 seconds later, pop the snap ring in. We have got our little springs behind these pins here, and observe the test to see if your clutch works. Turns, does not turn, will not turn this way. Turns, doesn't turn. Feel pretty good about that. Gonna slap the thing back together, fire it up, and see what it does. So if you're so inclined as to open one of these up, there's your order of parts. There's how things look. A real good look at it. Because parts diagrams from 100 years ago are pretty terrible. Alright, time to assemble. Just for posterity's sake, there's a look at the inside of the engine. We're going to drop our gear on the primary shaft and then button everything up. Slew of small parts here. That retainer goes in, then that nut, then that cover plate, then this bearing and clutch adjustment deal. Okay? So, You could read a book, or you could take it to a mechanic, or you can watch this and learn from me doing everything the wrong way by trial and error. But it is what it is. So there it is, all back together. Good close-up look at what's going on. There is a little spring behind that middle pin, just for posterity's sake. And as I alluded to earlier, after I got that clutch problem fixed, I test fired it. I couldn't get it to shift through all the gears, so I took that cover off again, pulled the clutch, pulled that big primary-ish gear, and just had a look at the mechanism. Didn't touch or change anything, but I was going through the gears with it open, and everything worked fine. So I put it back together, and it ran like brand new. Starts on the first kick, all 3 gears, even neutral. It's amazing. Sometimes I surprise myself. For all the stuff that wasn't perfect, it is pretty amazing that I got the timing, both valve and ignition, dead on without having to mess with it. Given the things that could go wrong, granted this is a very simple engine, yeah, but I feel pretty good with it. I really like the way that it turned out. This bike, when it came to me, mostly complete. All of the little parts were there, and the parts that were taken off were well documented, and nuts and bolts were in a little bag. The rear shocks on this thing had completely gone to trash. They were rusted in about 5 different pieces. So I think that might have been the original reason, coupled with the Kickstarter, that it got put away. So a couple of new parts later, and you've got a pretty complete, really quite rare motorcycle here. I've looked up fully restored versions of this mini trail, and they go for $3,000 to $4,000. You know, right buyer, crazy auctions, etc., etc. But I'm really, really proud of the way that this bike turned out, and mostly that engine. That engine's really, really pretty. I like the way that it came together. So it's not perfect, no, but like all the things that I mess with, it's meant to look good and mostly restored, but also be something that you can ride and something you're not too afraid to run into a tree or get a little muddy or whatever. The bike's meant to be ridden. It's 100, 500 years old, whatever it is. Math was not my major. It's a really old motorcycle, but still, I like it when they're used and they're ridden by friends, adults, family, kids. You know, you make memories on them, and that's what they are there for. So really happy with the way it turned out. This is just a little video walkthrough of the whole thing. And that's what we got. The bike went home to its owner today. Should be surprising the dude at his birthday tomorrow. And I'm going to paint that tank, like I said. Get it on there, and you should have a running motorcycle. In the interim, I just used a turkey baster to squirt some gas into the carburetor, and that worked okay. And it was fun, but it was a blast to ride. It brought back some memories of the old 69 and the 70 Z50 that my sister and I used to have as kids growing up in San Marcos, Texas. So fun to work on. It was a cool project. All told, cost-wise, maybe $800 of parts into this thing. Time-wise, possibly, I've got to think, maybe a solid 40 hours of labor went into it. Again, not the best of details here and there. Like, we didn't re-chrome the chrome pieces. Like, I felt they were fine. Some of the bolts are a little bit rusty. Stainless steel hardware all the way around on the engine, of course. New brake shoes all the way around. New brake cable. It has that new hub in the back. Put a new taillight lens on it. LED taillight bulb. It needs a couple of small things. Like the forks need to be rebuilt. It needs a headlight. That front fender that I got from eBay is cracked. But I've been told they're sending me a new one. We'll see about that. So it's not a perfect bike, like I said, but really, really fun. The color isn't historic. All the decals aren't on it. So, you know, it is what it is. It's a bike meant to be ridden around the backyard or a farm or whatever it's going to do and have a second lease on life. So thanks for watching this one. I'll see you for the next one, I suppose. And I made a clutch video on this thing a week or two ago. If that's still up, because I'm going to delete it, disregard that, unless you want to put the clutch together wrong. Really disappointed that nobody told me anything between now and then. Maybe next time. See you down the road.